the very being of the country on life support. I'm very proud to say, Mr. Speaker, that it is in Britain that we have stepped forward to provide life-saving
international attitudes. Talking about Britain's place in the world, if the government looks to put forward those rules through Parliament on sanctions against those who violate human rights, will the Right Honourable Gentleman agree with me that in that legislation we should put our values clear, put religious freedom there, put modern slavery there, put freedom of media in that, so we are clear where we stand on those sanctions on those individuals who violate human rights?
Let me just answer that and draw on my experience. Because it is perfectly true that we want to collaborate and cooperate across the world on important issues to us, including modern slavery. And I have paid tribute in part, and I do so again to the previous Prime Minister for what she did on modern slavery. She took it very seriously and put forward serious legislation before the House, which made a real difference not only in this country but across the world. But the most intense work we do, with the best arrangements, are with the EU. On counter-terrorism, we have arrangements in place across the world. Of course we do. But the best and the most intense are with the EU by a country mile. I'll just finish this point. They are far more effective in so many respects. The ability to share intelligence with our EU partners is on a different footing to other countries across the world. The enforcement mechanisms, to take a simple example, every terrorist cell that I ever ended up prosecuting operated across borders. And one of the vital questions in those circumstances, do you have the necessary arrangements to carry out the arrest of that cell and assess its intelligence together as a group? That is available through Eurojust. Do you have a strategy for making sure that your arrests are all carried out at the same time? Do you have a protocol for deciding where the prosecution will take place so that it's likely to be most successful? And equally, do you have rules about whether evidence captured in one country can be used in the other? All of that is available to us as a member of the EU. All of that falls away, particularly on a no-deal Brexit. Technical it may be, saved lives it did in huge numbers. I will give way.
On the subject of intelligence, the Right Honourable Gentleman knows full well that our many intelligence allies under Five Eyes are not actually within the EU. But he makes an important point. Of course it's important we continue to share intelligence on everyday matters with the EU, and I for one do not believe that the EU will not want to do that, otherwise the United Kingdom will be the weak link in their chain. But he makes, if I might say so, a fundamental mistake when he presents his argument as a binary choice in terms of trade between the EU and the US, thereby neglecting about two-thirds of the world, including some of the fastest emerging markets in the world, which are not in the EU, and they're not the US, the Commonwealth countries, and other countries further afield, those are where our future markets lie.
Firstly, on the question of security, I well understand the Five Eyes arrangements in terms of intelligence sharing. But even with the Five Eyes countries, we've got problems with extradition. I did many extraditions to the US. They take years. They're hugely complicated. The evidence has to be tested in a different way here before you can extradite someone to the US, and vice versa. And sometimes you can't extradite because there are conditions around it. Compare that with EU extradition, which takes days. We had bombings in London, as we all know, the 7/7 bombings. We forget that 2 weeks after that bombing, there was another attempted bombing, which only didn't succeed because the explosives devices were damp, 5 of them. And one of the individuals who tried to detonate a bomb in Shepherd's Bush ran off to Italy. And we had him back here within 60 days under the EU extradition arrangements. He was then tried in Woolwich, and he's now serving 40 years. That is what happens under a European arrest warrant and extradition. We don't have those arrangements with the Five Eyes countries. We simply don't. And I'm not doubting the intelligence side of it. I'm talking about the practical enforcement of counter-terrorism measures. That is the reality of it. Is why this do or die will leave without a deal is so wrong for our country. I will give way.
The Right Honourable Gentleman is making a great speech, but I would ask him, isn't there a huge question mark over the Schengen information system, the largest database in the world? And if we don't have access to that, our citizens will be under threat.
I do agree with that, and that chimes with what I was saying. I think there was a second part of the challenge that was put to me that I haven't yet addressed, which is surely our future lies elsewhere other than trading with the EU. I don't accept that. What is this argument? That somehow not trading with the countries that we trade most with, and just, well, maybe if I finish, you can then come straight back in. The EU, through EU trade arrangements, we have access to another 67 countries. So the best part of 100 countries are available to us through EU membership because of the trade deals the EU has done. So you've got the original 27. Just let me finish the point and then you can shout at me. Why wait? It might be worth waiting. 27 countries we directly deal with as a result of the customs union single market in a most effective way, and every business in the country that trades with Europe says they're excellent relations. Through the EU membership, we have another 67 countries that we deal with on EU trade agreements. That's nearly half the world. So this argument that somehow there's a brilliant tomorrow out there that's got nothing to do with the brilliant arrangements we've got in place is something I've never seen evidenced or argued. In fact, I looked through the government's impact assessments when finally we're allowed to see them for evidence that these new trade agreements were going to make up for all the loss, and it wasn't there. The government's own assessment said we'll be worse off as a result of leaving the customs union. I will give way.
Sorry for missing the very beginning of the debate, but I had a meeting with the Aviation Minister. I want to go back to his point about he believes that this is a very bad deal for workers' rights and so on, and I completely accept that is the Labour point of view, and it should be put to a referendum. I accept that is their point of view. If it were to be put to a referendum and the public voted for that deal, even though the Labour Party feel it's not the deal they would like, and then there were to be a Labour government, would they implement that deal? Because it is important to know that even if they disagree with the deal, because there's going to be a huge amount of legislation that will go with any deal, that they would deliver the deal despite their misgivings about the deal.
Thank you for that question. Let me be clear about my position. I think if we go down this road of having a referendum, and it must be between a negotiated deal and Remain, and by a negotiated deal I mean one that the EU would actually sign off, because I don't think it's fair to people to offer an option to leave that isn't a proper option. I would go further than that. I would advocate in this House that we actually pass the implementation legislation subject to a coming into force date or something like that to show that it could be done straight away, because I think we would have to show it had been secured with the EU and therefore could be delivered, and also that we'd already put in place the means to deliver it in this place, so we could actually resolve this one way or the other within a short period of time. And I now think it's the only way to break the impasse. I'm going to make some progress, and I have taken a lot of interventions. But that is the approach we take on this side, that is because we believe in international cooperation and in upholding international law, and that we need to work alongside our closest and most important allies. And let me just take one example of that, climate change. I listened very carefully to what the Secretary of State said. This Queen's speech has 22 bills. Yet what was there actually on climate change in the speech? One mention in the final paragraph. Yet the climate emergency should be the issue around which our politics evolves and revolves. It is the foreign policy challenge of our time. It's the defining issue of global security. And it should be the focus of the UK's diplomatic and development efforts. It should have been the centrepiece of this Queen's speech, not Brexit. And I think the fact that it got just one mention is a measure of the government's lack of leadership on this central issue. So, Mr. Speaker, this Queen's speech was entirely unnecessary. It's packed with bills that the government knows are never going to get passed. It fails to recognise, let alone tackle, any of the huge challenges we face, and shows the government is oblivious to the need for radical change. And frankly, it's the weakest defence imaginable for the decision to prorogue Parliament for 5 weeks, which was unlawful and obviously unnecessary. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
My words, Robert Sims.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. 7 minutes, thank you. I welcome the Queen's speech and the range of bills which the government have put forward. I prefer we weren't having a Queen's speech and that I'd be knocking on doors in Poole at the start of the general election. Because clearly it is true that there is an impasse in this Parliament, and it's largely caused by people who said one thing at a general election and have moved in their position. And I haven't, because actually I think honouring the referendum is a matter of honour. And it's what we said in our manifesto, what I said in my election address in a moment, and it's what all the parties actually said, that they'd honour the referendum. And people voted to leave, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health. And it wasn't actually conditional on anything in particular. But I happen to believe that a deal is probably better, because I believe in a managed exit is probably going to be less difficult. And if
headquarters are a little bit better at sticking to the law than the Prime Minister appears to be.
Well said.
The UK government's own analysis tells us that every type of Brexit will leave us worse off and poorer as a result of leaving the EU.
Right.
Every type. We're healthier with the cooperation in medicine supplies and groundbreaking research for membership. We're wealthier with access to the world's biggest single market. We're fairer with workers and parental and other rights that I would not trust this or any other Tory government with. And we're greener in tackling the climate emergency and technologies where Scotland is leading the way, even if this government doesn't always give us the powers that we fully need. And of course we can do better. Deepening cooperation between 28 independent and sovereign states, because members of the EU are independent